Hey, we've got to admit this intro is getting. I think we've worn it out or something, haven't we?
That's quite poor, isn't it?
Yeah, it's getting bad. I'll have to try and do some tech on that if I can. Speaking of tech, there's loads of clips today, folks. So bear with me. I'm not as good as Jeremy at this kind of malarkey. So anyway, welcome to the Animal Rights Show. This is our kind of commemoration, I suppose, or at least it's associated with and about Tom Regan. And for those who don't know, but looking at everybody in the chat, everybody does know, I think. Tom Regan is regarded as the originator of rights-based abolitionist animal rights. And he wrote a groundbreaking text, which is not easy to read, but it's groundbreaking, in 1983 called The Case of Animal Rights. So essentially then we're going to split this into kind of 2 weeks, really. So so this one we did a show before where we kind of chose clips and texts from Regan, and we've kind of done that again, but also with half a mind to the fact that there is some critique now of Tom Regan. We've kind of mentioned this in previous shows that you know, Regan started writing about other animals in the late 1970s, and the case came out in the early years of the 1980s. He started writing it, I believe, in 1981. It was published in 1983. So it's bound to be, in some senses, a little bit kind of dated. So we want to look at that. There are quite a lot of people who now talk about moving beyond Regan or even beyond animal rights in this kind of liberal tradition that Regan was in. So we're going to try and look at that. We're also probably next week going to try and make sure that we can use our commemoration and critique of Regan to see what then we can do in terms of how do we use Regan, as it were, on the street, in terms of our posters or in terms of our argument, that kind of thing. You know, would it be possible, you know, to have a rights-based conversation more so than the usual kind of cruelty kind of claims making that is prevalent in the movement? There's those kind of things. So I think I've covered everything that we need to for the intro. Do you agree, people?
Yeah, can we just say hello to people in the chat? So who have we got? Let's just see
go ahead.
We've got Ronnie Lee. Hi, Ronnie. Have you recovered from your birthday bash last week yet? And we've got Deb. Hey there, Deb. Welcome back. Dr. Milan, new name there. I don't recognise that one. Hey there. Welcome. Jennifer. Hey, Jennifer. We've got Tim. And we got Vegemite Codbod. And we've got Terry, who says hello to Brian as well. And we've got Tabitha. I think that's a new name as well. And we've got Amber. So hi, everyone who's joined us. Do say hello in the chat if you're here and you haven't said hello.
Yeah, and you said that we just about survived Ronnie's birthday bash, and there's a coincidence in the sense that Tom Regan died on Ronnie's birthday. I don't know whether Ronnie knows that, but it's a bit of a uncomfortable coincidence, perhaps, but we'll see. So we've got some clips. We're gonna start with a bit of a kind of biographical one, really. Chosen by our Tom, and it's from an early TV, North American TV show, and so it's transcribed or transferred from VCR, so it's a little bit ropey in terms of the way it looks. It's also the longest of the clips, so try and bear with it. But it's howdy from Texas, howdy. That's Nessa.
I believe it's from 1987.
1987, is it? Yeah, it was. Yeah, I can only remember the title of this one. Remember the title of it? It's something people, isn't it?
NC People, is it that one?
Yeah, that's the one. Okay, so without further ado, I'll add this, and this is really where Regan talks about how he started becoming an animal rights advocate and the reason why, I suppose.
No, what got you involved this way?
Well, one's never quite sure, I think, when you kind of go back and try to analyze your own beginnings. But I think what happened in our case, anyhow, was that to begin with, my wife and I were active in the anti-war movement, the Vietnam era. And for some odd reason, it occurred to me that if I was going to be an effective activist on the platform, that I had better be a relevant scholar in the study. So I combined my activism with scholarship, and I wrote and did research on topics like violence and aggression in war, and of course nonviolence. In the course of doing the research on nonviolence, I read Gandhi. And it was as though Gandhi spoke to me from the pages. He said, look, Tom Regan, you're really concerned about violence in terms of tanks and napalm and all this. What about that fork you've got in your hand? And I often say Gandhi was the first person who taught me that the fork is a weapon of violence, that here I had been so acculturated as to not even think that there was a moral question about eating animals. And he said that, again, speaking from the pages, do you think that violence stops at the boundaries of your species? And I thought, well, no, I think he had a point. So I began to think, as my head was moving in a certain direction, but also just about that same time, my wife and family, we returned from a short vacation, and to discover that our beloved dog had been hit that very day. And this dog had been our surrogate child for 13 years, and plunged us into enormous grief. As everyone who's watching this understands, when you lose a companion like that, the grief period is real. And so my heart was opened up to a depth of feeling that I hadn't realized that I had. And I thought, well, I guess I really do care about the pain and suffering of animals, not just this particular dog, but any dog or cat. And then once that my heart started opening up and my head was coming in this other direction, there was no turning back. I've been on a roller coaster from then on.
Yeah, roller coaster indeed. In fact, Reagan famously described himself as a modeler and suggested that most people kind of get there by modeling along, and that kind of elicits kind of ideas about journeys and steps and everything, which can be kind of controversial. So Wendy, Dr. Engel has introduced himself to you on the Culture and Animals Foundation, which was founded by Tom and Nancy. So I believe that Nancy is still active there. So that's pretty good. So
thanks for joining us. I really hope that we do Tom some justice on the show, and yeah, thanks for being here.
Vegan Education on the Go, that'll be Declan. Hi, Declan. And hi, Danny. Yeah, Jennifer says that's a brilliant clip, which it certainly is. So, yeah. Gerwin says, I'm late. Okay.
And also,
right.
hello, Kathleen, from Berlin. We have some new people with us today. Very nice.
Right.
From all over the world as well. That's incredible.
Right. Okay. So let's move on then, perhaps, to one of the substantive issues that we wanted to go through, and this is the first clip. We've got a couple of clips from Tom's appearance on the BBC. There was an arena evening. It was called Animal Night, and it featured a lot of different things, including spitting image and a really interesting account of a court case that occurred when some monks sued some mice for eating their crops, and the mice had a as it were, a barrister or a legal representative, and they came back with the charge of prior ownership of the land. So there was a kind of court case that went on, which is pretty interesting. Let me get rid of that. All right. Okay. So this is 1989, and this is where Reagan opens up the debate, which was about, they called it a Bill of Rights for other animals at the time.
Not anti-science. This philosophy is respectful of our best teachers.
That's right. I've done it wrong. I knew I would eventually at the beginning. The thing is, I've got some of these on my screen, but I can't actually see them until I start playing them. So I'm really sorry about that, folks. But let me see if this is right.
See which one we get.
Abracadabra. Let's go on this one. Is this the one? Yay!
There we go.
The other animals humans eat, use in science, hunt, trap, and exploit in a variety of other ways have a life of their own that is of importance to them apart from their utility to us. They are not only in the world, they are aware of it and also of what happens to them. And what happens to them matters to them. Each has a life that fares experientially better or worse for the one whose life it is. Like us, they bring a unified psychological presence to the world. Like us, they are somebodies, not some things. In these fundamental ways, the non-human animals in labs and on farms, for example, are the same as human beings. And so it is that the ethics of our dealings with them and with one another must rest on some of the same fundamental moral principles.
The sound is a little bit in and out, so apologies for that, everyone.
Yeah, I turned the ticker off to see whether that was doing it. I think my computer is being asked to do far too much work. If I believe so, I'll try and cut down on that, and I'll also delete these things once I've used them as well. So that might help. So there you go. Anybody want to make any initial comments about that?
I like the phrasing that he uses, and it becomes one of his almost a phrase that he repeats quite often in his speeches and the talks that he gives. In, you know, the other animals are not just of the world, in the world, they're of the world. They're aware of the world. They're aware of what happens to them, and what happens to them matters to them. And I think it's just a beautiful way to start talking about other animals as individuals, and not just, you know, just a mass of species who are here for us to use and commodify and exploit and all of that. I think it's just a lovely kind of simple way to start introducing that concept.
Yeah, we also got to remember that was a really radical thing to say in the late 80s as well. You know?
Yeah, I've seen him talk in other videos describing humans and other animals as biographical beings, which touches on your point about how you know, that we share a unified psychological kinship with other animals. That's a common similarity, in that it speaks to, I guess, their the intrinsic value that other animals and us, we all have together as well, which is one of his concepts. I believe he phrased it inherent value, which is something he talks about greatly in his work.
Yeah, I suppose the groundbreaking part of Reagan was when academics said that essentially he'd succeeded in getting the idea of rights over the species barrier. So there's always been this issue that the idea of rights belonged to human beings only because we were the only ones, allegedly, who could think about them and talk about them, write about them, and everything else, and discuss them. And Reagan said, but that doesn't necessarily account for the scope of them, in the sense that we do know that there's quite a lot of people who can't understand rights, who nevertheless, in our view, have them. And even talked about how there's some people who don't understand genes, but they have them. Genes, as in the genes inside, not what you wear. I think is the issue there. So so it's an interesting one in the sense that there's always this thing. Well, it's a human invention, and so therefore it should be limited to humans. But that's not the way that rights happened, and in the sense, and this goes to some of the critique that we'll get onto probably either later or next week, is that the idea of rights was kind of associated initially with kind of elite white men, and then the idea expanded from there, and then the idea then would be that you would take an idea like that and you'd extend them until it no longer makes sense. And so the bound in the animal movement is the boundary of sentience, or more controversially in Reagan's idea of subjective life, which is another one of those kind of areas that could probably create a critique. And in terms of what you said, Wendy, one of the things that we will have to get onto is the fact that there is this critique now of animal ethics, which is based on the idea of beings are worthy of moral concern if they're like us. And of course, that was the kind of language of Tom in that clip, which is quite interesting. You know, like us, they do this, and like us, they're doing that. And so it's seen as a kind of, well, what about those who are not like us? And so we did look at a podcast while we were preparing for this by an academic from University of Strathclyde, yes, and it's called Ian Offer, Offor, Ian spelled weird as well, Iyan, Ian Offer.
And the podcast is Beyond Species. It was a most recent Beyond Species.
It's a recent one, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
It looks like a version of Earthling Ed, funny enough, but he was talking about how we need to move away from this idea that animal ethics is based on the others whom we care about have to be like us. What about the ones who are not? And then of course you then get into plants, insects, those kind of areas that are always been on the periphery in terms of Reagan's kind of view. Where it breaks down, there's an issue there, which is why he came up with another one of his famous phrases, which I always mention, which is that there is line drawing in animal rights theory, but you should draw your lines with pencil, and because they're going to change. And one reason they're going to change is that we're going to learn more, not least because we've now got disciplines like cognitive ethology. And so, Reagan was kind of quite adamant about that okay, we do have these, we do have a new boundary, Then there was also a critique about the circle, but we'll come on to that another time, I think. Anybody else want to say anything more about that particular?
I just wanted to say that although this critique is legitimate and we should explore it, it doesn't really discredit Tom Regan's work, because we have to keep in mind that 40 plus years ago, he did an amazing thing. He proved that we should extend the Kantian rationale to other animals. And this was groundbreaking. And he dealt with the objections in a way that no objections can hold. So no matter what happens in the future, and of course we should evolve and reject ideas and adopt new ones, his contribution to the movement is huge.
Oh yeah,
that's right.
I think we'd all agree that we owe him a great kind of intellectual debt in that sense.
And I think sorry, Roger.
No, carry on, Tom.
I was going to say, I think if anyone's read the case for animal rights, which Roger mentioned in the intro, which is
nobody has, by the way.
If they have, they deserve a medal. I think, because it's a very technical academic read, and he wrote it in sort of to his other philosophical peers to try challenge their perspectives and make the case for animal rights, which I think as Noah said, there's such a conviction in his advocacy that he does a really, really good job. And when I learned more about Regan, I read one of his blog essays on his, I think it was his website, and he said how when he was writing the case, he for 12 hours, I think it was for a year, he worked solidly for 12 hours every day, toiling away writing the book. So he put so much effort into the book, and he said that he had this, I believe, I'm paraphrasing, but this great sense of relief because he felt that he'd made such a big contribution to animal advocacy, and that it would really what he was advocating for would take off and penetrate in the movement and would lead to some substantive change. And although we've seen some substantive change, sadly, as we all know, his work hasn't really penetrated the advocacy of our movement, and in ways that I think that we would say in effective ways. So I feel that that's kind of missing from our movement in some ways, an acknowledgement of his work and how we can feed it into our advocacy. But as you mentioned, Roger, we'll perhaps get to that.
In kind of part two. Yeah, I mean that's the kind of tragic, and I always think it's a very sad part of the Reagan story, is the fact that he did earnestly believe that he'd started the animal rights movement, which would take rights seriously, and it never did. And he must have felt terribly let down, and he even kind of alludes to that really in the preface of the updated version of the case. Actually, I on a lighter note, I kind of think that he's working there that 12 hours a day, Tom, and you can think, blimey, I've written the case for animal rights. I wonder what I should call it. So we got the case for animal rights. So the next clip is Reagan explaining a little bit about what rights are and in a way kind of what they do. So let's go to that one. Let's hope it plays okay. Here we go.
Sense then, rights place limitations on other people's freedom. That's their function in the moral sphere. Your rights limit my freedom. And the same is true vice versa. My rights limit yours. And so in this sense, we can think of rights as it were, like invisible no trespassing signs. And what I'm saying here is then something like this, see, you may want to, but morally you're not free to invade my body. You may want to, but morally you're not free to injure me, or to crush my organs, or to blind me, or to break my arms. You're not free to invade my body. It's already occupied. In case you haven't noticed, there's somebody here. This body belongs to somebody. No trespassing. And when it comes to my life, again, you're not at liberty to take it. It's not yours.
Indeed. And to preempt what we're going to, when we talk next week about maybe using Reagan's work on the street, as it were, I think that idea of a fence around an individual or a wall around an individual with a no trespassing sign, I think people really latch onto that because they realize how protective that would be for themselves as an individual. There's a bit of a nuance in North America because rights are usually seen as a kind of protection against the government often, and you get left and kind of like left and right versions of that. So there is that a little bit. Let me just bring this in. I think this is an interesting comment. Tom holds that being an experiencing subject of life is sufficient for possessing rights. But he never claimed that being a subject of a life is necessary for it's an interesting one. The main controversy about the subject of a life was really about who it covered, and Tom said that Tom was saying was kind of writing for other academics and trying to get them to accept the case, and so therefore some of the case for animal rights was written in a very conservative way in order to kind of, if you like, move the argument on, I think. And I think subject of a life is certainly one of those aspects, because when he started talking about subject of a life, we're talking about mammals of 1 year and older, and those kind of issues. That became an issue within the movement, I suppose. At the same time, right at the end of the case, he did say, well, that they're not the only ones, and so he did say right from the start that that's not the the end of it in that sense. So so that's an interesting one.
I think it's interesting to start thinking about rights in that way as a protection of your bodily integrity, your freedom, and that your rights limit the freedom of others to interfere, invade you, and all of those things. Because I think often when people hear rights, there's often in the movement, I think, that confusion between legal and the inherent rights. I think when people hear rights, there is often that thing of like, oh, you're protected by law, and you hear that in the street when you're talking to non-vegans on outreach, but you also hear it within the vegan movement, that they kind of almost flip between moral and legal rights, sort of interchanging them. And I think it's really a great concept to think of that no trespass sign. So it's not that it's a legal protection, it's that it's your space, your boundary, your personal inherent boundaries that you have. And also after that clip, what Tom goes on to say, he talks about how there are considerations when we talk about moral thinking. There are the social custom, there's public good, personal gain, and then there's individual rights. And he talks about the rights of individuals being the trump card, that they trump everything, so that you can't justify violating the rights of an individual just because another group of individuals might benefit from that, and also that we all have them equally, so that your right, my right, the rights of other animals, we all should be protected against the same sorts of things equally. Our freedom, our life, our liberty, that they should be protected and respected in other animals in the same way that they are in humans, but not legally speaking, inherently speaking.
Yeah, I used to like that kind of wall around an individual and the fence around the individual, but also like the game of bridge kind of idea, that the trump, so the trump, even if the trump was a 2, it would out trump. Yeah. So hang on, I'm going to sneeze. Hang on a second, folks.
Hang on, I've got my headphones and it's going to. Was that it?
No, I muted it, but the thing is, as soon as you say that,
it doesn't come, does it?
No. Actually, what you were saying about legal and moral rights is interesting, because the clip that I chose, which is coming up a little later, is where Regan talks about, as it were, the link or the relationship between the two, because he suggests that the lawmakers have a duty to kind of codify moral rights into law, which is quite interesting, because that's often what doesn't happen. It doesn't mean that those rights don't exist. It just means that they've not been respected. And of course, when you think about our relations with other animals, that's exactly the case for animal rights, that other animals have rights, not that we need to give them to them as some kind of gift. They have them. Yeah. It's a question that we need to persuade people to respect them. That's the big difference. And that's one of the things, when people talk about rights, they often say we need to give rights as though there's some kind of gift. It's as though, if you look at a British case like votes for women, that they you got a situation where the kindly women had to wait for for the nice men to give them rights. Well, that's not really the case. That they were arguing for their moral right to be a full member of society. So that'll come up in a bit. We're going to move on to.
Can I just bring up Dr. Mylan's comment? Dr. Mylan says, "I now prefer override to trump." I think for obvious reasons. Yeah, I take your point there. Thank you. It's a good point.
Oh, yeah, that's a brilliant quote. Yeah. In fact, it's funny now. You can't hear that word without thinking of the dog. It's just terrible. Yeah. Yeah, you just cannot.
That needed a bucket.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Trump might be back. Have some more grab a pussy vegans. Anyway, that's another debate altogether. So,
Can I just make one point actually? I think from what Wendy, you were just saying, this really, for folks who aren't aware, but this is what Reagan's position on the development of rights is what separates himself from utilitarianism and welfarism, because he looks at the consequences of an action. Is that going to harm someone, and that's the baseline, assessing the consequences of potential harm. Whereas utilitarianism and welfareism would look at the overall benefit for others as a result of an action. So there's a real clarity, I think, with Regan's work in advocating for rights, advocating for abolition, and not, there's no kind of room to go down the welfare route, which unfortunately our movement has. But yeah, that's my take on it. And I know we've covered this in the show, but I just wanted to make that point.
I agree with you. I think that he did an excellent job in highlighting the shortcomings of the utilitarian approach.
He calls it morally bankrupt, doesn't it? In that speech, actually, in that debate with the 1989 speech, he says it's morally bankrupt.
Morally bankrupt, but the interesting thing about that, though, there's a kind of movement story to that. There is a video which has got many more thousands of views than that one, because the full length one of that 8-minute opening was published by Animal Rights Zone. Before that, it was published by the movement. I'm not quite sure who did it, but they edited out that critique of utilitarianism from it, because I contacted the Culture and Animals Foundation, because when they were using one or the other, they used the edited version. I asked them to put the longer version back in, which they did. I think the reason why the first one got a lot more views, perhaps, was the fact that it was actually fit. It looked better. It was clearer and everything, but it was edited. It was just about to launch into that critique of utilitarianism. It just fades out and it starts again. So yeah, that's a kind of movement issue there. So Tom, we're going to move on to the beginning of the summing up of the 1989 thing, and you like this because of Regan's passion, is that right?
Yeah, I liked his passion in this section, how he kind of responds to the arguments that are put against his position and others that he's defending for, and yeah, you get a real sort of taste for his passion and his that comes out, which I think is kind of rare to see in Regan, because he's usually comes across as very humble and very measured and calm. I know there was another talk that he gave. It might have been when is it? I think it was an animal science use protest that he was also very impassioned. But again, this is
sort of justice.
Sort of justice speech. Yeah, very impassioned there. But it's just nice to see that side of him.
Yeah, the good news about the sort of justice speech is that we're working on, or somebody has kindly said that they can improve the look and the sound quality of that. So
that's brilliant.
That'd be great if it does.
I love that one. I think is it too late? Is it too late to put that one on for me? Because I know I didn't.
Yes. Well, all
is it too late? No, just a little bit of it. Just the beginning bit.
I could get a little bit up on. There is a little clip. I'll try and find a clip.
Oh, go on, Roger. You like spontaneity. You know you like spontaneity.
Well, we're going by the agenda so far. Tom's introduced his bit already. There's one little bit that Tom mentioned before, which was that Regan said, "I've not heard so many weak arguments," and there's a voice saying, especially from your side. That person is Stephen Rose. Now, there's some interesting stuff there, because in 1969, Bridget Brophy, who wrote a really kind of important article about animal rights in 1965. But in 1969, she appeared on Scottish TV with Richard Ryder. And that's seen as the first TV show that ever covered the issue of animal rights. But then they did a lot of other things, like, for example, an Open University series of debates. And Stephen Rose was the chairperson. And so he was negotiating ahead of time with Brophy. And so Brophy wrote to Richard Ryder and said, this Stephen Rose is really antagonistic to our side. So I want you on my side as an ally as well. And you can see that it's the same guy who makes this snidey little comment in this clip that Tom has chosen for us, which I'm going to play now.
Of all tonight, I call on Tom Regan to sum up the arguments for the motion.
Well, I couldn't have a more impossible task, since I don't remember ever hearing so many weak arguments in such a short period of time. But we believe, and also a good bit of rudeness as well, but we believe that the weight of the evidence impartially assembled is on the side of animal rights. People say, well, where do you draw the line? Which animals? This bespeaks a profound failure to read the philosophical literature in which this has been discussed over the last 10 years, something no educated person taking part in this debate should take any pride in. I would have thought I was listening to a collection of sophomores at times. It takes my breath away. What happened to Peter Singer? What happened to Stephen Clark? What happened to my own work? What happened to Bernie Rowland's work? I have no evidence at all that anyone representing the opposition has read so much as a single page of this philosophical work. I have no evidence. I have no evidence. None. No evidence. None. I have not heard a single member of the opposition challenge a single argument of the philosophers and the theologians. What I have heard instead are things like the following. There are no human rights, only legal rights. Only if the law recognizes them do we have rights. This is again part of the utilitarian tradition. Bentham, moral rights nonsense upon stilts, but that's not part of another major part of Western moral tradition, and that is that the law's obligation is to accord with the moral rights that people have independent of the law, anterior to the law. The tradition of the natural rights theorist, the tradition on which the animal rights philosophy stands. We are claiming that there are moral rights apart from the law, and again, that the obligation of the law is to recognize, respect, and protect those rights.
Yeah. So that's really in the sense that he's arguing that legal rights should follow from moral rights, and that in some senses it's I suppose one argument you could make it that's a very democratic thing, that, you know, as it were, the will of the people speak, as it were, you know, the views of the people are sovereign and all that, and it's up to the legislature to bring that into law, and essentially I think that's kind of what he was getting at. Now, for Wendy, I think I might have cracked it. I'm not sure. See if you can see this.
I can hear it, can't see it.
Yeah, I can't see it.
You can't see it?
No.
Is said to be extreme, and those of us who hold it are said to be extremists.
You see it now?
Slogan suggestions.
No.
That extreme positions cannot be right, and extremists must be wrong.
All right.
But I am an extremist. When it comes to rape, I'm against it all the time.
All right. Well, sorry about that, folks. I was all excited. I thought I cracked the technology.
Me too.
Clearly I hadn't. So, well, there you go. Okay. Well, now you've put me completely out of kilter. What?
Sorry, Roger.
completely out of kilter. I've got to find the bit that's. All right. So it's my bit now. Yeah, so somebody say something when I'm trying to set this up.
Well, it's interesting, that clip, because again, going back to the legal and moral, there are so many, and I think a lot of advocates would say this on the street as well. You know, people always come back to you with the legal argument. Well, it's legal. I can do this because it's perfectly legal. But there are so many cases where, you know, legal does not mean moral. There are many things that we would consider immoral that are still legal, and there are many things that are now illegal that used to be legal. Many things that are illegal now that used to be legal, and now we would consider immoral. So morality shifts, and I think it's like Tom was saying there. We have to legality has to kind of follow morality, and it's not doesn't stand alone. It has to be guided by morality, and morality shifts and expands all the time. So, did that fill a little bit of time, Roger?
Yes. Thank you so much. You're the polyfiller of the show. We've got 43 people watching, folks. So, as they say in YouTube land, smash a like on the video, which apparently helps on some technical thing.
Smash a like. You're so down with the kids, Roger. Down with those kids.
Smash a like and what is Cranky Views?
Click the subscribe box.
Yeah, don't forget to ring that bell and all that bullshit. Right. So,
can I just say, Gawain's mentioning in the comments, actually, he said, how about setting up a vegan book club? And actually, you're not the first person to mention this. Actually, we've been talking about this recently. I was talking about it, I think, with Pamela, who was on the show last week. How about setting up a vegan book club so we can go over things chapter by chapter? Because I think that's a good point. I think, as Tom mentioned earlier, the case for animal rights is quite a difficult text. It's quite heavy. It's quite philosophically heavy. And I think that can be a barrier to people picking that up and reading it. Or you pick it up and then go, yeah, okay, I'll come back to that. And it is quite hard. So that might be something that would be really useful to sort of go through some of the concepts and make them just more digestible for people.
Yeah. The Gawain said, like, smashed. So it's quite good. And there's another thing about there are some fairly recent journals, for example, that have done that, and I think we've got the thing there. Yeah, Between the Species. Yeah, so I think Caroline Bailey of AR Zone has got an article in there. I think the keynote is Gary Francione, and Gary Francione's got a love-hate. No. 80 is probably the wrong word, but got an interesting kind of relationship with Tom Regan. They worked very closely at one point, and then there was a bit of a kind of split, really. So and then finally there's this one.
Yeah, I was going to say the relationship between Francione and Regan was a bit like of a young Jedi with the Jedi Master. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah.
But then the young Jedi kind of went rogue and took some of the ideas from Regan, the Jedi Master, and developed them himself. That's how I look at it.
So how would Yoda say the case for animal rights? Rights the case for.
I'm not going to try.
Yeah, no, perhaps we should move on. Okay. So this is the clip that I chose, I believe. So let's see if I've got this right. Okay, folks. So this again is another clip from the 89 debate, which, by the way, Regan and the team won. It was Tom Regan, Richard Ryder, and also Andrew Lindsay. And also in the background, just behind Tom, is David Icke, of all people, when he was a spokesperson for the Green Party. And his clip is on YouTube, and it's actually very good. He mentions Henry Salt and people like that. It's actually very good, before he went bonkers, I suppose. So are we allowed to say before he went bonkers? I don't know.
Off-piste?
This is pro, not anti-science.
Wild?
This philosophy is respectful of our best science in general and of evolutionary biology in particular. The latter teaches that, in Darwin's words, humans differ from many other animals in degree and not in kind. Questions about line drawing to one side, it is obvious that the animals used in laboratories, raised for food, and hunted for pleasure or trapped for profit, for example, are our psychological kin. This is not fantasy. This is fact, supported by our best science. The philosophy of animal rights stands for, not against, justice. We are not to violate the rights of the few so that the many might benefit. Slavery allows this. Child labor allows this. All unjust social institutions allow this, but not the philosophy of animal rights, whose highest principle is that of justice. The philosophy of animal rights stands for peace and against violence. The fundamental demand of this philosophy is to treat humans and other animals with respect. This philosophy, therefore, is a philosophy of peace, but it is a philosophy that extends the demand for peace beyond the boundaries of our species. For there is an undeclared war being waged every day against countless millions of non-human animals. To stand truly for peace is to stand firmly against their ruthless exploitation.
Well said, that man.
Hear,
And
hear.
so, yeah. So in terms of both the summary or the summing up, it's called on YouTube, and also that opening that we've used a couple of clips from. Tom Regan explains how animal rights and human rights are really interlinked, and they go together. Neighbor's terms of kind of entanglements, they go together, and that's how he talks, which is a really interesting way. Again, on the street, talking in those terms, kind of blending the idea of respecting rights for humans and respecting rights for other animals. It's quite interesting. When
that clip really makes me think. Oh, sorry, Ned, are you going to say something? I'll just really quickly, because it just really made me think. Everything he was saying there really ties into the philosophy of veganism. Everything he was saying, it was like it was almost like the merging of the two in that little section there of the whole, the human rights, the peace, extending over the species barrier. It just really made me think how aligned that philosophy and veganism are.
Like a consistent anti-oppression stance. Yeah.
And it's very interesting that he makes clear this all these years ago, and now there are still parts of the movement that are arguing about it, if animal rights are relevant to human rights and vice versa. It's as if it was never an issue until it became an issue lately.
Yeah, I mean, it is true. I mean, my anecdote from that is when I was a SAB and then like a street activist, in the what decade would you think it was, Wendy? In the 1980s?
Could it be the 1980s?
It could be, yeah. It was very common to go subbing. We used to go subbing at least twice a week in those days. You go subbing on a Saturday, and you go on a kind of demo, or even something a bit more militant on a Sunday. But then you'd be going to Rock Against Racism gig, and then you'd be on a Reclaim the Night kind of march. It was all just a justice-based push in those days. For women's rights, for just for everything, against oppression in general, and for rights across the board. And there was none of this kind of that's not my gig and all this kind of stuff. I
think it was a more radical time, wasn't it? Straight out of the punk era from the 70s, the early 80s, still punk, and also with what was going on, and I don't, in the UK especially with Thatcher, and privatization and the miners' strikes, and there was a real sense of radical, and actually standing against oppression, standing for rights, standing for justice. That it seemed to be very much a much more radical time, and now it feels like, I don't know. Are we a bit more comfortable? A bit, is it kind of a bit more moderate now? Things seem to have moderated quite a lot.
Well, it could be. It's interesting because, like in sociology, they talk about post-material values. I recognise this as an individual. I moved to Manchester. We were living in this kind of squat in a place called Hume. It's all been knocked down now. This place is called the Crescents, and the place was a complete tip, And you were thinking, blimey, the humans are going to have to be liberated, because until they are, they're not going to have any headspace to think about our relations with other animals. So you got this idea that you need to have a certain material standing in order to, post-material values, in order to kind of move your consciousness to consider others, if you like. And that's why a lot of social movements are middle class in nature as well. You know, it kind of feeds into that. You know, you're not struggling on a daily basis in terms of, you know, you're not homeless and you know those kind of things.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Say again, sorry, Tom.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, that would be part of it. Although, yeah, it's more like social movement theory that goes into the post-material values, but it's certainly kind of part and parcel. Yeah. Okay, I seem to have two bits of film that I'm not supposed to have now, I think. So we're moving towards our last clip, really. So that's the one that you chose, Nella. But we've probably got a good 6 or 7 minutes before we do that. Yeah, Ronnie reckons that the movement is more radical these days, and in some ways less.
In what way, Ronnie, do you think it's more radical? I'd be really interested to hear what you think there.
Yeah. That certainly goes against social movement theory, which tends to say, you know, Corey Wren covers this quite a lot. This idea that as a movement grows, and certainly when it professionalizes and entrepreneurializes, I suppose we have to say nowadays, that it tends to kind of moderate in terms of things. And I see that our movement has done that. I don't see I'm not quite sure where the radical bit is. It's quite interesting to see what's. Yeah. Oh, I like this one. I said something true.
Don't know which bit that was, but
yeah.
One thing was. In terms of the promotion of veganism coming to the fore.
But that's not seen as a radical thing to do, though, is it? You know, so you know, and then you've got the nuances of people are promoting veganism as a diet. I suppose we could have an entire program on that, I would think. Yeah, this is very true. Thinking about Tom Regan, there's always been that thing. I used to give a talk about animal rights, and I used to ask if anybody's read Regan, and none of the hands went up. And same for Danae, and even Francione. He was kind of more known, but not really the books. It was more the controversy. And then when you said Singer, all the hands went up. But the last time I did that, none of the hands went up for Singer either. You know, which was always the case, because like it used to be the case that everybody had read Singer, but apparently not anymore. But do
you think that's been the explosion of social media? Now people are spending so much more time on other platforms, you know, things like this, obviously. Thank you for being here. Not going to slate YouTube or anything just right now, but you know, being on YouTube, there's more content. There's more podcasts. There's a lot of different content on different platforms that maybe are more accessible.
Yeah.
You know, and what's interesting as well is a lot of the really nominal texts for animal rights are not on audiobook, and I think audiobooks have taken a bit of a, you know, had a bit of a burst as well compared to actually sitting and reading books, but a lot of them are not available or accessible there. So that would be something that would be good if that was addressed, maybe.
Is this you volunteering to read the case on the tape?
I would. I definitely would. If a female voice is acceptable for that, it might not be. I don't know. But if we're gonna feminize it, I'm happy. I'd be more than happy to do that.
Well, I mean, that's an issue that we certainly need to return to next week, because people are on Twitter will probably see that Carol Adams, the author of Sexual Politics of Meat and Pornography of Meat, has kind of issued a whole series of fairly angry tweets about the invisible nature of women writers, which is quite interesting, because it kind of plays into that early kind of history of things. You know, I mentioned Bridget Brophy, but there's you know, like you know, this is an early book, but most of the writers in that book are male. Whoops, that one there. But then there's another one from 1971, which is called what's it called? Animals, Men, and Morals, it was called. and there's quite a good blend there. So there's 5 women authors and 8 male authors, but in terms of, well, I suppose you could say that in terms of the ones who are known now, hardly any of them really. I mean, Richard Ryder is there, but then again, I wouldn't think that Richard Ryder is a particularly known name in our movement now. Richard Ryder, for people who don't know, coined the word speciesism, but I don't think he's kind of known kind of in the movement. So all of those early pioneers in terms of thinking, they've all gone. I mean, Maureen Duffy's there. She's got a great book called the Animal Rights Handbook, which is really interesting. We've got Muriel the Lady Dowding, which is a great name. Ruth Harrison, she did the Animal Machines early on. Bridget Brophy as again, and then Ross Godlovich, who was a kind of joint editor of that book. So there was quite a lot of voices back then, and it seems to me that a lot of them, whether they're male or female, have disappeared. You know, whether that means they've been invisibilized, I'm not quite sure. But I do take Carol's, initial idea that there's been a general kind of invisibilization going on. So that is something that we're going to have to return to a little bit. Oh yes, this is something that we've talked about on the show very much. I always tend to say that if you want to engage with Tom Regan in terms of the books, then I would think that maybe Defending Animal Rights from 2001 is probably a better start than The Case, because The Case is can be quite dense, and in fact Tom was quite unapologetic about it. He said, well, it's a difficult read, but it's philosophy, and so some philosophy is a bit difficult, so it's almost as they get on with it, I suppose he was saying. But again, it was a difficult read when it was published, and that was when people read. So the idea that it's an impossible read, perhaps now, because I mean we don't know many people who have ever read The Case. I wouldn't think.
I would argue that it's not an impossible book to read. I mean, it's not the easiest book of all time, and it's much more difficult than Defending. Defending being in essay form is a quite easy read, in my opinion. But I think that we should try and read The Case. I mean, one needs to be patient about it and revisit some pages and some ideas, but it can be done. It's not that.
There is this one that's been pointed out. This is a very good book, actually. This one, and it's quite a slim volume, and this is pretty good. Also, there's the animal rights debate, which Reagan did with Carl Cohen, and there's quite a lot of the elements of The Case in that. So if you want kind of more like bite-sized pieces of that, and then of course the kind of later publication, Empty Cages, which is interesting because there is some suggestion that there's quite a few elements of animal welfareism in that, which is quite interesting from our point of view. So,
and just for people who who might want to access these books, there is I can't remember. I might know, actually, you others on here. There's a library, isn't there, where you can access and kind of borrow the books online for a while. Can you remember what that is?
Oh, I was looking at that yesterday. I can't remember the name of it now. But is it a book depository, something like that?
It might be something like that, but you can actually go in there and see what books are around, and you can borrow them, almost like an online library, and then you get a certain amount of time with them. So some of those books might be available on there if we can.
So they post it out to you and you post it back?
No, it's not an actual physical book. It's all there. They've scanned a lot of books in.
Right,
it's literally an online, so you'd probably read it on your device or whatever.
Okay.
So what's the point of giving it back then?
I think I don't know how it works, but there is a limited time, I think, and if it's it does work like a library, and I'm not actually sure. I haven't got my head around how that works, but it does work a little bit like a library, and that there are limited copies.
Okay, I think we should. We're just about at the end, folks. So we've got we've got one clip left, which is the one that you chose, Nella. This is Nella 3. I've got on my notes. So what did you want to say about this one? I hope I got it right.
I think that it's an interesting one because yet again he addresses a problem that we face today in the movement, and that is not knowing the movement's history.
Okay.
One of the things he addresses in this clip is that.
Yeah, I think I got the wrong one. Give me a second, folks. Really doing well. Is that not? It's still blank, so it might be the right one in the first place. Let's see. Give me a screen if it's not right.
Would you like to share a message for newer as well as seasoned animal rights activists, please?
Yeah, I wanted to begin by saying something to those who are new to the animal rights movement. It's important to remember the deep historical roots of animal rights. From the ancient world, for example, animal rights advocates read like a who's who of cerebral excellence. Ovid and Horace, Porphyry and Pythagoras, Plato and Socrates and Plutarch. When you join the animal rights movement, those of you who are recently active, you reach across the centuries and clasp the hands of the best minds from the ancient world. To my mind, that's always been an inspirational thought, which is why I hope activists new to the animal rights movement will keep that thought in mind. But I also want to say something to those seasoned animal rights activists, noting that my wife and I have been in part of the animal rights movement for over 40 years. For animal rights advocates to achieve our goals, we must first create a critical mass of people who believe in animal rights. How we do this is a divisive issue. Different people think differently. But that we must do this is not a divisive issue. It's plain as the nose on our face. One thing we know, we are not going to create this critical mass if for everyone who joins the animal rights movement, someone else leaves. You can do the math. +1 and -1 equals 0. Do people leave? Yes, they do. In fact, they leave in maddening numbers. It's like a revolving door, new people joining, old people leaving. So what I am saying is this: first obligation for seasoned animal rights advocates is to keep on being active. Without the combination of new people joining and old people staying, achieving our animal rights goals is hopeless. It really is that simple.
Yeah, that's the famous revolving door problem, which we definitely have. You know, it's something that we haven't figured out how. Yeah, I'm not. This would be a good idea, and I should have thought of this actually. Funny enough.
I've actually saved all of the links, and we could probably put it under the comments after. Maybe would that work?
On YouTube. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we'll do that then. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, folks. I think we're out of time. Thanks very much for coming on in such big numbers. We had 42, 43 at one point. So thanks very much. Keep smashing those likes, folks.
Can I just say what?
I don't need to say that. I'm just trying to cover up that because I ballsed up the tech, I think. So smash those likes. Okay, folks.
Can I just say one thing?
Tom wants to say something.
I just wanted to repeat the comment from Deb Thompson early on in the feed, and she said, "Reagan's words appeal to your heart and your mind. And that comment really resonated for me, and I just think that it's we can take so much strength from the work of Regan, and that he was asking the right questions about the effective animal advocacy, and that his words and his talks are so powerful. And I remember having read a few of his books, just feeling this so galvanized and in my conviction about animal rights, and it's inspired me to, in my advocacy and thinking about these wider issues. So I think she hit the nail on the head with that comment.
And the answer to that question on the screen is next week. So it'll be the same time, the same bat time, the same bat channel next week.
And I think we're going to be looking more at. Sorry, just to literally say, we're going to be looking more at how to apply. We can apply, develop, evolve, and apply the theory more into our advocacy as well.
Yeah, we just lined ourselves up with a lot of prep for next week. So we'll see you then, folks. Think of us during the week with our noses in all the books and all the rest of it.
No change there. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.